All right, I'm Stephen Mancuso with the Tupelo Auto Museum. My title is Director of Collections, and I started here in July with the expectation that I would help organize everything and give Jane some options and the board of directors some options as to what the next steps would be with the future of the museum. So I initially started off with really just an inventory of everything in the building, which is a monumental task, to say the least. Everything from the signs to the cars, what equipment was on what cars, where they were built, who restored them, are they numbers matching, that sort of thing. And we're sitting in today. This is a 1948 Tucker torpedo, affectionately called the Tucker 48. Preston Tucker was just a really fascinating individual in the history of the cars. And for me personally, as a child, one of my favorite movies was Tucker, the Man in His Dream. And so this car really is a culmination of where my passion really began within the car world. And I met the Spain family and obviously the people here at the Tupelo Auto Museum because I was in insurance, and I ran a program for Hagerty Insurance where I focused on car collectors, large car collectors, museums, race teams, that sort of thing. And that's how we got to know each other. I was her insurance agent. And really we built a friendship and a trust when she understood that I had a better than the average bear information about the car collection and some really, you know, I knew enough to be dangerous, I guess is the best way to put it. But this Tucker is really interesting, and it's been here for I mean, since the museum opened. Frank purchased this car in 1993 from a dealership in Sarasota, Florida, and it was one of these things that, you know, as I researched through the files, and Frank would find cars in magazine articles like this one, or in classifieds and newspapers from all over the world. He got newspapers from just all over the world. And he saw something he was interested in, he'd call, he'd write a letter. He kept copies of all the letters he wrote, which is just fascinating when you go through and you get to know somebody through their writing. I really enjoyed that aspect of this job. And this particular car had been restored in '92, and then put up for sale right after it was restored. They put the restorer put 80 miles on it, and his name escapes me at the moment, but he was the founder of the Tucker Automobile Club of America, who I contacted relatively quickly once I started researching the cars, and they keyed me in that there was a video of this car on the racetrack. We had documentation that showed this car was one of the 7 that was at Indianapolis. And they took 7 cars and they drove them around the racetrack at high speed for months at a time to show their lasting durability and performance of the cars, where famously number 1027, which this is 1028, 1027 was rolled at the racetrack at over 95 miles an hour, and it rolled over 3 times with a blown tire is what caused the accident. They changed the tire, started the car up, and drove it. And so really made the car famous for its ability to survive a crash, and not to mention that the driver got out with nothing more than a scratch on his arm. So it was really a car about safety, performance, usability, where the multiple features are just staggering at the time. You know, we've got a line of cars in the 1930s here, and when you compare this one to the 1930s cars previous to it, it sits much lower because the motor's in the rear, which means the drivetrain is able to be in the rear and allows the suspension to be lower to the ground, which also makes it safer because it doesn't roll over nearly as easy, unless of course you're doing 95 miles an hour on a racetrack. But it's got double-paned or double-lined glass, where when it breaks, it will shatter, but it doesn't crumble into the car, where one of the common accidents was lacerations from car accidents. There's a crash zone here to my right, where theoretically, if you were going to be in a car crash and you saw it coming, you could jump down into this little compartment here and you'd be safe. But they also padded all the interior with leather, and not only did it give it a more, you know, luxurious effect, but it also was a safety feature. So you're not hitting cold metal whenever you're in an accident. Initially, this car had seat belts, but uh, the different manufacturers were really against Preston Tucker, because what this car would have caused is for everyone else to up their game and have to put a focus on safety, which nobody wanted to do that. And a federal judge said that agreed that if you had seatbelts, then it would reduce the public's confidence in cars and their safety, and we would want to make people think that cars weren't safe, because then they wouldn't buy them, which is just it's crazy to think about that kind of thinking today. But the car initially was designed with seat belts. It's got a center headlight that turns with the wheels, and we've got it on display here with the wheel turn, so you can see that center headlight does pivot. But it's just really an amazing car, and I've seen a few Tuckers now since I've been here. We took it out to Scottsdale, and myself and Wayne Carini went and surveyed another Tucker that was there, and it was a beautiful car nonetheless, but very different. And this car just really shows well. The gaps are incredibly good. It shuts the doors. They sound like a new car when you shut a new car. So it's just really a fascinating automobile. It's got a helicopter flat six Franklin motor. That's been converted to a water-cooled motor versus an air-cooled, which gave it great performance and allowed it to sustain higher temperatures for longer periods of time without breaking down performance. The transmission's in the rear. This is one of the few that has remained with the cord transmission. So they were pulling transmissions out of cords in the day, because it's just so expensive to redesign every aspect of a car if you can peel pieces off of other existing cars. But inevitably, the other large automakers were successful in shutting Tucker down before we ever managed to sell one. So people ask me all the time, how many would they sell? And the honest answer is none. So if they made 51, all of them were sold at auction, where individuals came and purchased everything in the building from the factory. So now there's 47 that we know to exist, and this is number 1028, which will be sold on April 27th, sometime around midday. And we're really excited to see what happens, and hopefully the new owners will appreciate it as much as we have. You know, one of the really interesting things, I won't say I've driven, but I've driven this car around with the help of a large airplane tug that we use to move cars around here sometimes. But I took it outside a couple of weeks ago, and as I'm making my rounds around the museum, it's one of the things I didn't realize is that the rear of the car is much wider than the front. It's kind of like driving a dually truck where the fenders stick out. So a lot of the common repairs that had to be made, or consistently has to be made on these cars, is that people will bash in the rear fenders because they stick out a bit further than you realize. But the car really is an incredibly solid car, being that it's low to the ground. It just it gives them all that really low sports car feel, but with a sedan. And they came with a set of luggage also that you could purchase, and it was either a man's set, a woman's set, or both, and they would fit nicely into the front trunk, which is where we normally would consider the motor would be. But we've actually got a women's set that's original to the car, along with an original stock certificate that you purchase with the car. But it's really just a fascinating automobile, and really a shame that we didn't see it in mass production. All of them are considered prototypes because there was never a mass production line for it. So many of our cars are kind of that way, where they really, each one's different because there was no mass production until Henry Ford. And so, you know, when you walk through the museum and the first few cars, they're all essentially prototypes, which were, you know, early production cars, because, you know, on the Knox, 1899 Knox that we have, they made 10. And it took them, you know, 2 years to make their first year car. So so it's really, you know, it's really amazing as you look at that. And one of the common things people say when they come through the museum is that I've never heard of so many of these cars. And one is because, first of all, early cars, there were a lot of manufacturers through the years, and so many of them had a very similar story to Preston Tucker. And once Henry Ford was involved, and there was someone that had just so much capital and influence over government, it was really difficult for some of these smaller car companies to sustain, especially when they were building a really expensive car for the day.